Here's orientation nomenclature for a rear-handled chainsaw. This is the bar, this is the chain. The chain goes into the chain groove. The chain is made up of a raker, which looks like a little shark fin, followed by a cutter tooth. Cutter teeth need to be pointing away from the saw on the top and pointing back towards the saw on the bottom. The top of the bar is the pushing side of the chain. The bottom of the bar is the pulling side of the chain. This quadrant of the bar tip right here is the upper quadrant of the bar. It is where the pushing side of the chain is transitioning to become the pulling side, and it is the kickback zone. This is the very dangerous area of the chain bar. If it comes in contact with a piece of wood in just the right way, it'll kick back at you, okay? The bottom quadrant is much safer, so if you're gonna start your plunge cut or what have you, it's already committed to the pulling side, so it's not nearly as much of a concern. So we've covered the bar nomenclature. All right, moving on. This is a chain brake. This is probably the most important safety feature of your chainsaw. You want to make sure that it is functioning correctly. When you're operating your saw, your left hand is supposed to be on the wrap handle, on the top part of the wrap handle, and your right hand is operating the throttle. And in the event of a kickback, your left hand is in proper position to activate that chain brake automatically. If the kickback comes on you, your hand is just boom, it's right there, okay? It's very important to be, your normal positioning of holding this chainsaw is like this. And the way that you operate your chain brake is by movement forward with your wrist. You do not let go and do that. You just don't do that. And you also don't let go with your right hand and do that. That is an absolute no-go, because that is less control on the saw for a brief period of time. The chain could be running and then you're not holding it as well, and it could easily swing out of control and hit you. So that is an absolute no-go. You are to continue holding it with your left hand and apply it with your wrist. And then you can take it off by still having your thumb on the wrap handle and pulling it back. That is how you do chain brakes, like that. Okay? So I do not want to see that. And I do not especially want to see that. That would be even worse. Okay? Chain brake. I'm working my way from the bar back. These are dogs, saw dogs, also known as I guess bumper spikes if they have it on the Sprocket cover. Some saws have it as well on the Sprocket cover. This saw only has one set of saw dogs. It does not have bumper spikes, but it has an option to put them in there. All right, continuing to work our way back here. We've covered the chain brake. This is the Sprocket cover, and it is held on by bar nuts. Okay, so these little guys are bar nuts, and you need a scrunch that can fit those bar nuts. In between the bar nuts is the chain tensioner. At least with the steel chainsaws, that's where the chain tensioner is. With other brands, the chain tensioner might be kind of on the side of the Sprocket cover, but the chain tensioner is always going to be somewhere in this area. This chain tensioner is designed with a flathead screwdriver to twist one way or the other to tension your chain. You do need to loosen the bar nuts to get that chain tensioner to work properly, and then retighten them. All right, so that's Sprocket cover. We're right here now. This is our wrap handle, also known as the top handle in some cases, but that can be very confusing to call it the top handle, because these chainsaws are technically called top handle chainsaws, and that's referring to the throttle handle. So it's more correct to call this the wrap handle, but you might call it the top handle by accident when you're describing a rear handle chainsaw. All right, so this is the wrap handle. This is the air filter cover. Not every saw has this, but this is a compression assist button, valve, whatever. You push that when you're first starting it up, and it'll help with the pull. It'll help. I don't know how it works. I'm not going to even pretend to act like I know how it works, but it helps with the compression when you're just first starting it up. All right, I don't know what these things are called, but they're like little captive screws that pop out. There's 3 of them with some of these models of steel. You have to twist them to access the air filter. Let's go ahead and do that. We're going to pull this air filter cover off and show this air filter. Every model of saw will look a little different, but let's go ahead and take it off. This one doesn't demonstrate it super well, but when we flip down the choke, there's a little butterfly valve that opens and closes, and you're probably not gonna be able to see it with the video, but it'll close when you put the choke on. That's your air intake to your carburetor. Very important that if you're gonna be cleaning out your air filter, you put the choke on, because it'll close that butterfly valve and keep debris from getting down in there. I'll show that on another saw where you can see it easier. This is where your spark plug is, okay? Just in case you flood it or you have a bad plug, you want to check it, that's where that is. Okay, so we're going to put this back on. Okay. So our air filter cover is back on. Let's continue down the saw. This is our rear handle, but it's also known as the throttle handle. This is the throttle trigger. The throttle trigger needs to have this safety lever depressed in order to pull down. So you have to be grasping it like this. This is our ignition switch. And some saws will also include like a primer bubble somewhere in this area. You can see this saw has a primer bubble right here, and then its ignition switch is up there, but that's because it's a top handle saw. So we're gonna do the top handle saw right after this. But anyways, your ignition switch can switch between full choke, half choke, on and off, okay? That fan closed across the cylinder, get a zoom in on that picture right there. It took me a really long time to understand the symbols. When the fan blade is closing across the cylinder, that is choke on, okay? That's your choke on. When the fan blade is like kind of diagonal to the cylinder, that is half choke. Not all saws have that. Some go from like just like a choke option straight to on. This I, for whatever reason, is on, maybe ignition, I don't know. And the O is off, okay? All right, so we're on this side of the saw now. We've got our gas tank with the rear handles. It's gonna be the tank closest to the handle. And then on the opposite side, closer to the bar, is our bar oil. This is our flywheel cover and our pull cord, okay? This is our muffler. We'll just go ahead and add that as well, because you need to be aware of where that is. It can start fires, it can burn you, okay? All right, now we're gonna do the top handles. Now that we know what the nomenclature is called, it'll be nice and quick. All right, pushing side of the chain, pulling side of the chain. That's our upper quadrant of kickback zone. This is our chain brake with our top handles right here. The bumper spikes are a lot smaller on these top handles because they're designed to be lightweight. All right, the sprocket cover, they typically only have one bar nut, and it may be a smaller size. So it's nice to have a scrunch that has both options. Okay, so that one's the smaller size for the climbing saw. The chain tensioner is right behind that bar nut. This whole thing right here is the sprocket cover, all right? And I didn't show it, so I'll do it on this one. Unlike the rear handle saws, the sprocket cover on these climbing saws, at least for steel, comes off with the chain brake attached. So with these ones, if I take the sprocket cover off, the chain brake is still inside. It doesn't take the chain brake mechanism with it. So it's just a simple sprocket under there, and the drum and the clutch is underneath that, and everything's, it's pretty simple. With this one, however, it takes the chain brake with it. So if you put your chain brake on while you're cleaning it and then try to put it back over, it's not gonna go back on. So you gotta remember to take your chain brake off and then put it back on. So you can get a better look at what's going on here. Got our clutch right here, all right, and the chain tensioner. These 201s are a little bit tricky to get totally off, so we're gonna get our chain right off of there. Takes the bar right off. Okay, the bar sits on this little bar pin, This little chain tensioner is what slots into one of these little holes. See that? Slots into that little hole like that. And then it'll push the bar forward or pull it backwards as you do this. You see how it's going backwards? And now it's going forwards. That's how it tensions. It pushes your bar up or pulls it backwards. Okay? When you're putting a chain on, you really want to bring this back as far as it'll go. Bring it back until it stops. It'll make it so much easier for you to get that chain on. Then there's the sprocket right in there. Okay? So like with the top handle saws, it's kind of upside down. The rear handle saws, you don't even see the clutch. Clutch is kind of under a drum, and the sprocket is actually on top because the chain brake is up. It's just left connected. It's not attached to the sprocket cover itself. Okay, but the chain brake on the top handle saws is built into the sprocket cover. All right. Now this has a captive bar nut, which is nice, but a lot of the older model chainsaws do not have a captive bar nut, so you got to be very careful when you're taking the sprocket cover off. Don't lose your bar nuts. Okay. Like this one. This one is not a captive bar nut. All right. Continuing on. Let's keep going with this. So that's our chain brake here. Same thing. Our rear handle is not really a rear handle. It's a top handle. So that's why we don't really call it the rear handle when we're talking about even these saws. We should call it the throttle handle. So our throttle handle is on top, and our ignition switch is right in front of it for these top handle saws. And our wrap handle is more off to the side. So you still want to hold it like this with your hand on top so that you can engage the chain brake correctly. But notice that the wrap handle doesn't wrap all the way over the top on these top handle saws because the throttle handle takes over for that position. All right, we have on the back here is our air filter cover. And then our air filter's right under it. And this one, you can easily see that butterfly valve. So I'm gonna open and close that. It's right there. Go ahead and get a top view of that. There's my choke. You see how my choke is closing it? So you want to throw that choke on when you're cleaning this area out. And I stuff a rag in there as well to keep debris from getting in there. But that's just something to understand. You don't want debris getting in there when you take this air filter off for cleaning. All right, so let's put all that back together. And this saw is so old and worn out that this little air filter cover set screw thing is worn out, so it doesn't even stay in there. So don't lose that when you take this apart. All right, so this is our choke. This saw has a choke lever over here. The 201 does not have any choke option. It just has a warm-up option on the selector switch, on the ignition switch, and it'll just do its warm-up sequence. It actually does not have a choke option. But this one has a choke option back here, as well as a primer bubble. This one, again, does not have a primer bubble. All right, and then you've got your warm-up settings. So you've got a full choke out here, then you have another choke setting on the ignition switch. So this saw is the most complicated to learn at first, the proper sequence of warming it up. All right, but continuing with our nomenclature, here's our pull cord, here's our flywheel cover, here's our bar oil. The bar oil is on the bottom, the gas is on the top, okay? And they changed that design with the 201, which is nice. They put the gas back here and the bar oil up there. But this saw, it's pretty easy, along with the Echo small climbing saw. They put them right next to each other. Gas is on the top for this one, bar oil on the bottom. All right, and then our last thing that's unique to these climbing saws is we have a lanyard attachment. Okay, so that's where you can hook up. You need to have a locking carabiner on this attached to your climbing harness so that it doesn't accidentally come off, or you drop it and it hits somebody or just destroys the saw. And that is nomenclature for top handles and rear handles.